so that Kenyans can also appreciate that once a public or state officer is given responsibility, there are consequences of their non-compliance with the summons or with the responsibilities that their offices demands of them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddie, you may contribute well seated, Senator Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, good morning. I have not been in the House for quite a while, and thank you for your support during this time. I know I'm still on sick leave, but sometimes it is sickly to be in the House and not to be in the House at home and not being here, because sometimes the deliberations here are more important and more healing than being at home. And I want to thank you so much for allowing me the flexibility to sometimes show up. Mr. Speaker, I think that this is a pertinent issue, and I think that from the minority side, it's very hard sometimes for me to chime in because, as you're aware, the minority side is still in court on this particular issue of cabinet secretaries appearing before the House. And I think that I wanted to just contribute in the spirit of being the Senate, and perhaps my ideological or perhaps our collective ideological leading that this House actually should be the upper house. And in some areas, we can be able to deliberate and have a conversation whether we can rethink some of the decisions that you have made, Mr. Speaker, because this is one of the instances that perhaps the minority side had predicted, and perhaps we might even have worse instances where cabinet secretaries might want to disparage the standing orders of this House for the same purpose that perhaps constitutionally they are not obligated to obey the standing orders of this House. I know there is a desire, and I believe that I speak to the minority side when I say that there is a desire, and rightfully so, to have cabinet secretary appear before the Houses of Parliament. Because if you read the Constitution does delineate the responsibility and accountability framework for senators, for cabinet secretaries. But that delineation is limited to the extent that they have to appear in committees. So this is a challenge that as a country we are dealing with, but I wanted to encourage the Senate to have a higher conversation of how do we make this accountability framework even stronger. To some extent, we might be faced with things like proposing a constitutional amendment, because, Mr. Speaker, the decisions, responsibilities, and accountability for cabinet secretaries is very well articulated under Article 153, which you have talked about many times, but I want just to go back to it for the purposes of this conversation. If you read 153.1, it says that all their decisions must always be in writing. And then, if you come to 2, it says that cabinet secretaries are accountable individually and collectively to the president for the exercise of their powers and performance on their functions. So then it requires perhaps that in the event that the standing orders of this House have been adjusted for them to appear, and then they don't appear, then, Mr. Speaker, does it mean that through your chair, the Senate writes to the president to launch a complaint? And if this House writes to the president to launch a complaint, what then becomes the accountability framework for the executive vis-a-vis the parliament? Because the moment we start exchanging with the executive, and particularly the president, on the issue of cabinet secretaries not getting to this House, then already we are interfering with the Constitution. Then secondly, the Constitution says that a cabinet secretary shall attend. Remember, the issue of accountability is provided for in terms of, 1, providing documents in writing, and 2, where they're supposed to attend. And the Constitution says that in terms of attendance, the cabinet secretaries shall attend before a committee of the National Assembly or the Senate when required by the committee and answer any question concerning a matter for which the Cabinet Secretary is responsible. With regards to provision of documents, if you read the same article, sub-article 4, that is where they can be able to provide us with documents in writing. So there's a lacuna here that we have created with the standing orders, Mr. Speaker, that I think that is dangerous for us and exposes us, because even if you are to impose something like a fine that some of my colleagues are proposing, on what basis does a Cabinet Secretary honor that kind of fine? Because if they go if you go to court, I can assure you the court will stick to the interpretation of what is the accountability lab and framework for Cabinet Secretaries as required in the Constitution. So I do appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that this is a dilemma that we are dealing with as a House, and you must be respected, we must be respected. But I think that whether informally or formally, I wanted to plead with you, Mr. Speaker, that this is something that we need to have a higher conversation than just the National Assembly, because we are the House that helps some sense of stability in terms of representation, given that as a Senate, we hold that majoritarian kind of representation, given that all the constituencies in our counties end up giving us that power to be able to help this House, this nation think at a higher level. I do appreciate that the majority side has decided that we adjust on our standing orders to allow the Cabinet Secretaries in. But, Mr. Speaker, we are going to face a lot of these dilemmas going forward. This is just an introduction to the dilemma we have with the Cabinet Secretaries, because some of them individually, as the Constitution has said, will be sure that they are protected by the Constitution, not to be punished by this House for not appearing or in this House, but in committees. So I wanted to urge, if it suits this House, that let's allow ourselves that this is a bipartisan conversation that we have at a higher level on how do we ensure that we can keep the Cabinet more accountable to us, but within the framework of the Constitution, that even if it is a hard choice that we have to make as a country to amend the Constitution, then let us do it. Because otherwise, they're not members of this House, and they're not obligated to be in this House, and they know, and you cannot punish them or keep them accountable to that unless you directly induce the same with the presidency, which again brings conflict of accountability and responsibility between the cabinet, between the presidency and Parliament in general, but more specifically with regards to Senate. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Matinga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to add my voice into this issue that has not only been affecting the business of the committee. Indeed, a lot has been said about the legal implication and legal requirements.